Most people think the biggest slave revolt in history happened in Haiti. But long before Haiti even existed, almost 1,000 years earlier, 500,000 enslaved Africans rose up against one of the most powerful empires of the Middle Ages, the Abbasid Caliphate. And the world barely talks about it. This story has been buried, softened, or ignored because it challenges a lot of comfortable narratives. But today, we're pulling it out of the shadows. The Zanj rebellion wasn't a small revolt. It lasted 14 brutal years, from 869 to 883 CE, shaking the foundations of the Abbasid Empire. These weren't soldiers. These were enslaved African laborers, mostly from East and Central Africa, forced to work in the salt marshes of southern Iraq in conditions so harsh that many didn't survive a year. Imagine heat so intense your skin burns, swamp water full of mosquitoes, and salt fields that slowly destroyed your feet and lungs. That was their daily reality. For decades, these Africans were shipped into Basra and surrounding regions. The Arabs called them Zanj, a catch-all term for people from the Swahili coast, the Great Lakes, and parts of today's Tanzania, Mozambique, Kenya, and Congo. Many were children, many were prisoners of war, all were considered disposable labor. And yes, this is a part of history few people want to discuss openly. The Indian Ocean slave trade existed long before the Atlantic slave trade. But what made this revolt possible wasn't just suffering, it was leadership. The uprising was led by a man named Ali ibn Muhammad, a charismatic figure who promised the Zanj something they had never been offered: freedom, dignity, land, and a chance to control their own fate. Some historians paint him as a manipulator. Others argue he was a revolutionary. But one thing is clear. He gave people who had nothing a reason to fight. And fight they did. The rebellion began when a small group of Zanj workers refused to continue working the salt mines. But within weeks, thousands joined. And within months, they had built an actual army. Disciplined, organized, and shockingly effective. These Africans weren't just fighting back. They were winning. They defeated multiple Abbasid armies, took control of towns, and even built their own fortified city, Al-Muqtara, the chosen one. At their peak, the Zanj controlled huge stretches of southern Iraq. They raided plantations, freed other enslaved people, and gathered fighters from all backgrounds: Arabs, Persians, Kurds, and even other African groups. Their numbers swelled until their forces reached nearly 500,000 people. One of the largest revolutionary armies of the medieval world. The Zanj rebellion was so successful that the Abbasid Empire had to beg regional governors for help, and even pulled troops from distant provinces just to stop the uprising. The Caliphate was already struggling with corruption, internal power fights, and financial problems. The Zanj revolt almost tipped the entire empire into collapse. And another hidden truth? A lot of medieval chroniclers downplayed African contributions. Some portrayed the Zanj as savages, because admitting that enslaved Africans nearly toppled an Islamic empire would embarrass the ruling elite. But when you read between the lines, even biased historians had to confess. These fighters were disciplined, strategic, and unbelievably resilient. The rebellion used guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run attacks, and a mastery of the marshy terrain, something Abbasid soldiers weren't prepared for. They built fleets of small boats to dominate the waterways. They used the environment as a weapon, and as they grew stronger, they shifted from survival to governance. They collected taxes, appointed commanders, and ran courts. It wasn't just a revolt. It was a parallel African-led state operating inside the empire. But empires don't tolerate challenges forever. Eventually, the Abbasids launched a massive counteroffensive led by Al-Muwaffaq, the caliph's brother, one of the smartest military minds of the era. He didn't underestimate the Zanj. He studied them. He cut supply routes. He built canals. He reshaped the battlefield. Bit by bit, he strangled the rebellion. What makes the ending so tragic is that the Zanj didn't fall because they became weak. They fell because the empire finally took them seriously. After years of battles, sieges, starvation, and devastating losses on both sides, the Abbasid forces finally captured al-Muqtara in 883. Ali ibn Muhammad was killed. Thousands of Zanj fighters were executed. Their leaders were imprisoned. And just like that, history tried to erase them. And yet, you rarely hear this story in classrooms. Why? Because it challenges narratives that portray Africans only as victims, not as revolutionaries.